Hello, good evening. Welcome to another episode of What's on Your Mind. I'm your host, Nimade Belu, or That African Butterfly. And this is our weekly series where we talk to different people in different professions about things that impact their mind and their mental health. And every now and then we also have a therapist with us. And so I'm so excited. Today I have Kayla Stansberry. She is a therapist who specializes in body trauma, fat trauma, intuitive eating, all of those things, and the intersection of racism and body image, lots of things you are well versed in. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you
Before we
so
go,
much
would you
for
like,
having me.
you're welcome. Before I start with the questions, would you like to just introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit more about you?
Sure, yes. So my name is Kayla Stansberry. I'm a licensed counselor. I've been a therapist for over 10 years now. I've been in a fat body my entire life with some, obviously yo-yo dieting in the middle to trigger warning. And I am just deeply passionate about working with people on body stuff and understanding it from a systemic lens to be able to deconstruct our relationship with all the negative body things that we often hear.
Yes, and one of the first times we connected on Instagram, because I live on Instagram practically, but I also had the pleasure of seeing you in Philly at the Philly Fat Con that they had this year, which was really nice.
Yes,
So
that
to
was
get
such a
started,
fun event.
it was. I can't wait for them to do it again next year. So to get started, I know that an area you're, as I mentioned before, well versed in is fat trauma. Like, what exactly is fat trauma?
So fat trauma is something that I have kind of identified over the years of doing my work. I'm pretty good at pattern recognition. It's something that's one of my side skills. And so after working with larger body clients for a long period of time, I started to notice that they had similar trauma symptoms and similar traumatic experiences that I was validating for them regularly, and it was impacting them in a very similar way. And so this idea of fat trauma kind of is what I started to call it, and it might already exist out in the ethers. And it was just a direct way to explain that living in a fat body is a traumatic experience, and there's direct implications for that traumatic experience that impacts our mental health.
Like, so what are like some common symptoms and signs that someone might be experiencing? That is it just like regular trauma but you happen to be fat, or is it like more specific symptoms?
I honestly think that anyone who's lived in a fat body has experienced a distressing or traumatic event regarding their fatness, because it's just kind of in everything we do. So a lot of that is internalized self-hatred, struggling with interpersonal relationships, struggling with goal setting, boundary setting for themselves because of their struggling with relationships and sense of value. So it comes up a lot in nuanced ways that impede the way someone would create a life for themselves. Also, it impacts how people see themselves on a regular basis, and our physical distress tolerance when we are out in public, based on if we could be harassed or something could go on that way. Then you're getting like cortisol stress responses as well.
That makes a lot of sense, and it definitely hits home for me. I know that as far as even just like my career pathing and things that I do work related, that it unfortunately it does impact that. And I actually had to make an active choice around the time I turned 30 to try not to let that stop me from my goals anymore. I heard the quote, "Don't wait on your weight to live the life you want." And it like literally changed my life, because I realized that's what I was constantly doing. Everything I wanted to do, all the things that I'm glad I can proudly say I'm doing now, were things that I knew I was talented enough to do before, but it was constantly, when I lose weight, I'll do that. When I lose weight, I'll do this. And I was just pushing that. And then finally I was like, no, I'm going to do it now, because I'm all of those things now. And whoever doesn't like it can just deal with it. But it's hard. It's hard.
It is very hard. I remember early on in my therapist experience being like, who's going to listen to a fat therapist? Like, I obviously can't get my life together if no one's going to really want to hear what I have to say. I won't take me seriously. All these internalized thoughts about where we see fat people, where they can exist successfully, and that impacted how you set your goals up for who you want to be.
It does. And especially for me being in like the social space, honestly, just this morning, I had to wake up and delete some mean comments. And, sometimes I'm able to do it and it rolls off my back. I'm like, whatever. Because truthfully, and what I tell myself is A, it's a reflection of that person that they have to make mean comments. And B, people who are happy aren't making mean comments about people for no reason, especially when it's nothing weight related. Like we were in the comment section about a TV show and they had to roll it back to my size. And I'm like, what does that have to do with anything? So for me, I can usually be like, they just can't make a valid point. But every now and then it does kind of like it stings a little. It's like, because we're still human.
I say to people I work with that it's not something that you just one day are healed from. It's something that like every day you kind of have to work a little bit at, and we get better. We have better days, and then there's some days that still really sting because like people use fatness. I use it as a neutral term, but people use fatness as like the ultimate insult you could possibly give to someone, which is why you see people who are in an argument with you go, well, you're this, and that's their way of that final plunge. And it takes a lot of deconstructing for that word not to bother us, for that word, for the shaming not to bother you. It's a lot.
It really is. And that word specifically is something that I've had to work at, being like, it's just a description. Like, and we use it in so many different ways. Like I feel fat, I look fat. Like, how do you feel? You feel bloated, maybe you feel uncomfortable, you feel all those different things. That is a description word, the same way skinny is, but it's really thrown out there as like the most negative thing. And I've even had conversations with like slimmer friends who I can tell they're trying to like not use the word like just as a description. I'm like, just say fat, like just about anything in general. Like it's an okay word to use.
Yeah, that is completely fine. It's just I guess it does depend on the person if they're comfortable with it. It's something that you have to definitely deconstruct. Like you said, you worked on it. I've worked on it. Sometimes I forget and I use it a little bit too chaotically. But it feels like a reclaiming. Like, I want that word. I want to keep it. It's mine. And I want to take the power from it. Like I want to take the power.
And I think that's the biggest thing. Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing is taking the power. By the way, let me just say, I apologize if we overlap with speaking. Like there's a little bit of a delay. So sometimes we might overlap a little bit. So I apologize. I'm not trying to talk over you. But yeah, my thing is also sometimes like when people are like, you're fat, and I'm like, and the sky is blue. Like what does that have to do with anything? And a phrase we hear a lot is glorifying obesity. And it's interesting because dare you be in a big body and try to say you love yourself or try to encourage other people to love themselves, which is what I constantly do, then you're glorifying obesity. Can you talk a little bit about that term, why it's nonsense and how it impacts us?
Absolutely. It's ridiculous. So I was watching someone recently who said that it's both ways. Like if you're happy, you're in trouble. If you're miserable, you're complaining too much. Like no matter what, you just can't exist. You can't have feelings. And the glorifying obesity component is basically hurled at anyone who's not hating themselves actively for thin people. Like I'm not showing up and be like, guys, I hate myself and I'm on a diet and I'm doing this and I'm doing that. That's the only way I'm able to practice fatness is if I do it in a good fatty kind of way. And it's exhausting and also traumatic because I can't smile in public. I can't eat in public. I can't, go for a walk without someone being upset that I exist or that we exist. And it's like, you can't win.
Right.
When it comes
and
to
I think
stuff.
people don't realize that a lot is like, because I already have a little bit of social anxiety, but it's definitely gotten worse as I got bigger. And then it really got worse after I hurt myself because I've been on like a cane for the past year or so. So I'm like, oh, like I almost want to wear a sign that says like, I hurt my ankle. I'm not just using this because I'm fat, but like, because you see it, right? You feel it and you know that judgment is there. And for me, like as much as I can be like, oh, I'm confident, I don't care. It's not so much that I care about, I would say like me, it's that I still know, like as much as I love myself, as much as I think I'm beautiful, as much as I know the people who love me, I still know how I'm looked at the lens of other people. And every now and then it just makes me want to like just back away and be like, I'll just stay home, which I do a lot.
Yeah, it feels, there's nothing wrong with staying home, but It feels awful to know that people are perceiving you in that way. And that's definitely ended friendships that I've had where I know someone's perceived me negatively, or they perceive fat people negatively. And then it's like, okay, so why are you close to me? Because like you can't pick and
Mhm.
choose those experiences. And kind of the point you said about accessibility and or mobility aids, like that's a special trauma too. And that's why I also like to talk about like the disability community and how those overlap.
Mhm.
Because if you're in a larger body and you happen to have a mobility issue, you're open to being shamed more.
Yeah.
And that's ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, it just adds on another layer of what you're already going through. And for some reason, I dislike when people are hateful about it, but I almost dislike the fake caring people more, right? Like the ones who are like, oh, I'm just saying this for your health, or I'm just worried. Like, and I'm
Yeah.
not talking about actual friends and family who actually care. I'm talking about like
Mhm.
strangers. And it's like, you don't actually care because like you're making a comment about somebody just based on their size and nothing else. It doesn't even have to do with the situation. But like, are
Mhm.
you making those same comments when you see slimmer body people actively
Exactly.
doing harm? Like, are you going under the picture of a slimmer body person eating a burger and talking about their
Mhm.
arteries in their heart? Like, you're probably not, because they look okay on the outside.
Mhm.
And that's really what people care about the most, unfortunately.
Yes, it's all about appearance and how you show up. And that is what gives people the idea, that the permission that they can kind of control your life. It's almost like you lose autonomy over your body when you exist in a larger body, because everyone's like, oh, I know how you should be taking care of yourself. And there's a
Mhm.
lot of health assumptions made. I think Aubrey Gordon uses the term concern trolling, which is just like, I'm pretending that I care. But really, I just
Mhm.
want to shame you because shaming you makes me feel good about myself.
Yes, actively. And it's so hard too. I almost find it more difficult when I'm in the process of trying to like lose weight and get healthy and all those things, which I'm currently on that journey again. It's a roller coaster, but it's almost like when I'm in the mindset of like, I don't care, I'm just doing me, I'm happy, whatever. It's like, you know, fine.
Mhm.
But when I'm in like, I'm already working on it. And then, because I remember vividly a couple of years ago, I had lost a bunch of weight and I was like 50 pounds down. And I was going out, I went to the store or something, just feeling good about myself. I had my workout, and some stranger felt the need to like come up to me and talk to me about like my weight and be like, I'm just trying to give you good advice. And I sobbed in my car afterwards, because it's like, I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do. Like, I can't blink and make myself smaller. I wish I could. Most people
Mhm.
do, but like you can't. And so for me, that's also something I wish more people would keep in mind when they're having their fake concern or real concern. Like, you don't know where someone is in their journey. You don't know if they've lost a bunch of weight just because they're bigger. You don't know if they're healthier. You don't know, maybe they've
Mhm.
worked so hard to get to that size
Mhm.
that you are now judging them for. And I wish people
Yeah.
would keep that in mind more.
Yeah. And a lot of us have genetic predispositions to be at certain body types. Like that's usually what the case is. And then the things that get in the way of us or damaging our like, where we're supposed to be naturally is the diet culture, yo-yo dieting, going back and forth, and things like fiscal capitalism, like fiscal, like having access to money, having access to
Mhm.
places to go work out. And then also kind of caveat on that is that when larger amount of people just got like sports bras and just got workout clothes.
Right. And
And
people had a
that's
problem with that.
yeah, and it was like, wait, so I need to work out all the time because I'm fat, but you're not going to give me any clothes to work out in because that's not worth your money. And so there's no, and like, so people don't feel safe at the gym because someone's going to say something. We're going to get filmed and it's going to be all over social media. Like, so where is the incentive to even care for our bodies in any capacity? I often find another trauma experience is disassociation from our bodies. So like
Mhm.
I'm going to disconnect as an act of self-preservation. And I
Mhm.
do like, so because if I'm connected with my body, then I'm aware of this like shame I might feel. So a lot of us get stuck in that trap because we are terrified of being embodied.
Mhm. Yeah, and sometimes I feel like, like for me, I'll just every now and then have those moments of like, I have so far to go. It's like, is it even worth it? And it's worth it, but it's still like, because you still, feel that judgment. And something you mentioned too earlier is like, how you feel when you go out in spaces. And I remember going to my first plus size event, and it released a level of tension in me that I didn't know that I
Yeah.
felt because of my
Mhm.
size. Like I kind of knew, but so I grew up in upstate New York in predominantly like white neighborhoods.
Mhm.
So I was used to kind of being like the only black face. Like if you look at all my pictures from like high school and college, whatever, I'm solo. So I kind of knew sort of that feeling. And so I knew the kind of release of when I went into all black spaces where I wasn't instantly feeling like, oh, I'm on
Yeah.
that. But I didn't realize that I
Mhm.
carried that same thing with me for my weight until I was in a space with other larger bodies and was like, I don't feel instantly apologetic for my size with the people I'm surrounded with.
Yeah, it's almost like a taking off a mask or like or even just feeling safe. And so the how that can impact connection is if you're walking into a social experience and your walls up, how are we going to connect in like a genuine, healthy way with other people if we're scared? And we have every right to be scared because flippant comments come out all the time. Uh, so that armor that we're wearing gets in the way of us creating these healthy relationships because we're trying to protect ourselves from someone saying something harmful.
Hmm. Yeah, and I feel like I'm walking through with the double whammy. Well, I'd say triple whammy because there's the women side of it, then there's the black
Yeah.
side of it, then there's the fat side of it. But I mean, I think
Mhm.
something that we know and something that you're well versed in is that, racism and white supremacy actually plays an active role in body image. Can you just
Yes.
talk a little bit about that, like how it helps to perpetuate certain body standards and ideals in our culture?
Absolutely. So anti-fatness is rooted in anti-blackness. So the concept there is, and it's the book "Fearing the Black Body" by Sabrina Strings, where she talks about how during the transatlantic slave trade, they demonized bodies to okay slavery, basically. So the othering of different body sizes, different textures, different curvatures, that was done intentionally to elevate whiteness, white supremacy, and to like separate humanity from these other communities. So fatness got pulled along with that too, even though there were like larger bodied white people. But it was still trying to create a body hierarchy, and white supremacy exists on hierarchies as well. Like I want to elevate thin, white, straight, cisgendered male, like that's the top of the body hierarchy, and then I want to
Hmm.
knock people down who like I want to go like anyone who's above me, I want to knock them down, or if someone's lower than me, I want to kick them out. Like the idea of challenging of always being in competition with each other, and that we only highlight a very certain specific amount of traits and we demonize the rest.
Hmm. What so over time, and I feel like a large part of what we're all impacted by now is media, because whether
Mhm.
it's traditional media on TV and movies or social media that we're going through online, like what are some ways that exposure to media is helping to influence and spread that ideal or that perception?
The just body acceptance or the white supremacy component.
The white, so like the white supremacy component, like that,
Yeah.
it's how is it impacting our view of ourselves and other bodies?
Absolutely. So what do we see on television? Like we only see white people. We only see thin-bodied white people adding on to that. So the hierarchy keeps going. We only get a reflection of what 5% of the population looks like. And that sinks into our brains. Not it's without our consent. You don't consent to it. Like I always say like if I watch a reality TV show for a while, I'll crave the drink they might be drinking a lot in the show. And
Mhm.
that is because just a piece of how it kind of gets in your brain. So if I'm watching a season of Selling Sunset or something, I'm for some reason going to picture the world as like everyone's in stilettos and a size 00, which isn't
Right,
real. That's not humanity, right?
right.
So the way that we're combating that is by trying to encourage people to diversify what their input. So seeking out places like this, places on social media accounts where they're showing that all these different types of identities exist. There's nothing wrong with them, and they're wonderful. And why aren't we showcasing that on a larger level instead of just showcasing the same exact body type over and over again?
Mm. And Izzy mentioned, especially on social media, I am a huge component of, I love the fact that you can sort of create your world with social media. it can be bad. And if you watched a couple weeks ago with my guest, Melissa, we talked about it, how people can create silos for themselves. But it can also be good because you can feed yourself that positivity. And I know for me, when I decided that I wanted to try to be more accepting of myself, I sought out other influencers and other people whose faces looked like mine to remind myself that it was okay, because we're automatically, like you said, fed a certain image, like thinness, whiteness, all of that. And if you don't go looking for it, sometimes you don't realize that there are people who look just like you doing what you do. And that makes you feel a little bit better to do it yourself.
Yes, social media, I feel like, was such a huge part of, I've been doing the Fat Positive Therapist platform for, I think, 2 years now. And it was such a huge part of being able to challenge some of the stuff I still had, because I was seeing these bodies in motion. That's why I really love TikTok for the long, I still do. But like seeing larger bodies in motion in bathing suits where they were buying their clothes, I was like, oh wait, you can dress this way, you can exist in this way, you can show up authentically, and there's other people that are doing it in a similar way. We don't ever get access to that information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that we have more of that now and can see it more. I wanted to ask you too. So a lot of times, and actually just today, we were talking about microaggressions on the racial side of it. I'm addicted to housewives, and there's a current housewife that's trying me, but but it's not just in the terms of like race and ethnicity, right? Like there's microaggressions towards people with larger bodies. Like, can you talk a little bit about those, like what some of those could be?
Yes. I don't know like the proper terminology for it. Like if it crosses over from like racial to body size, but I will identify like some that could be similar. There probably would be like another term. Someone will make it up. What a comment is you can say to a larger body person that is harmful. And I'll give you an example of one. Like I was I was on a trip with a friend, and I was very safe and very comfortable, and they had told me that someone died in their lives. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so upset. And then they're like, yeah, and they weren't even fat. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, okay. You don't see me? Like, you don't see that? Okay. All right. And this person was very thin. Like, so that one's a bit more direct, but that's a kind of a little slip of, I think that you could probably die early because of your size of your body. And you're just like, oh, wow, like it's 11 o'clock on a Saturday. Like that's a rough thing to say to somebody. And like, so little nuanced things, like you said earlier, kind of saying like, oh, I feel fat. Like that's one. Talking about obesity in general, I think is a pretty rough topic. That term is used for a lot of like hatred. So I think people are kind of pushing away from it. Not having your size in clothing at stores, like that's another, it's more of like not feeling left out, like being ostracized, not having accessibility seating in spaces. Like these are all messages that say like, hey, you don't belong and we don't want you here.
Yeah, and it's hard when you feel that way internally, and then it's even harder when it's like reflected back to you. Like it just validates in the worst ways what you already think is bad. So what are some strategies or coping mechanisms you would recommend for someone who has that negative body influence, especially based on, the internalized beauty standards that have been set for us?
Absolutely. So we already kind of talked about one today, and that's the changing your feed. Like I want you to mute all of the thin people, and nothing against thin creators. I follow some wonderful ones, but if you're on a journey to start normalizing different things, then we need to change how we're viewing our world. Like, so that means there are a higher number of thinner bodied social media spaces, because that's just what it's been for a while. So we want to cut those out, and we want to add a bunch of larger bodied ones, preferably bigger than your body, like your own personal body. We want to challenge ourselves. No one smaller, and then try to find bigger, because we want to normalize that your body exists and that it's can do a bunch of different things that you maybe have thought it couldn't before. Also being really aware of what you're bringing in television wise, commercials. I try to stay away from commercials as much as possible. That's really hard. Because they're just awful. On the radio's rough too, right? So it's like finding these places where you can protect yourself, like you were saying earlier, like a silo, but maybe a safety bubble, right? Where we're
Mhm.
starting to challenge our reality and actually have it match what's going on. And then another one I like to give people is, if you're outside, I want you to look at everybody, and I want you to kind of intentionally identify like people in the world and their body types. Because if you go to any store, you're not just seeing one body type. Your eye is drawn to that body type because that's the type you're used to, based on television. But that any population of people is going to follow the similar percentages. That I think 65% of Americans are in larger bodies. So most of the people in that space are going to be in larger bodies, or a
Mhm.
higher,
Yeah,
more than
it's like
half.
one third. It's like one third of Americans, like millions, are in larger
Yep.
bodies. So it's so wild that there's still so much discrimination about it. Because it's like, if you aren't, you know somebody who is, and then the people who are comfortable making those comments, it's like, well, I know you may love me, but I know how you really feel about it, sort of deep down
Yes.
inside, even if you're not saying it based on your comments
Yeah.
about everything else.
You still think that you're superior based on your genetic body size, and that's a kind of a component. This is just another form of like eugenics, is that your body size is making you like perceived as superior, because we all know thin-bodied people who cannot gain weight. Like it's just
Mhm.
not a part of their body structure. They can eat the most energy dense foods possible, and their body is still going to look a certain way. And we don't bat an
Mhm.
eye at that population because we have perceived their thinness as healthy. And I mean, who cares if they're healthy or not? That's not really my business. But I think it just like helps kind of point out how it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. And Chuck said in the comments that there's that misconception that if someone is thinner, that they're automatically healthy, which we know is not
Mhm.
true, because a lot of the same um, health risk and conditions and things like that for larger bodies happen with people in smaller bodies. But like, I feel
Yep.
like if it's someone in a smaller body, people want to know, like, why, what happened. When it's someone in a larger body, it's like,
Mhm.
well, you did it yourself. It's like, well, they did it themselves
Yeah.
too, and like, how many people
Yeah.
who are smaller actually work out and have healthy habits? I think we all saw from the
Mhm.
quarantine that, if you too are not actively trying to lose weight, a bunch of people were also just gaining weight because they weren't having like the regular active
Mhm.
normal day to day, and they weren't people who were focused on fitness. But there's that lack of concern or caring, I feel like,
Yeah.
when it's with someone in a larger body who has any health conditions.
Yeah, and then we also don't consider the bigger picture is who has time for all of these behaviors that we're expected to do. Like we're all working to death, and like we don't have time to make these really intentional community-based meals, to engage in movement that's really therapeutic and joyful. Like there are so many barriers. I think it was Ashantis. I can't remember her handle right now, but she was talking about industrial barriers to movement. And it was like,
Mm.
yeah, if you're in a loud area, or an area that doesn't have access to any walking like spaces, how would you engage in movement that wouldn't be like you wouldn't have to pay for? Like there's
Right.
so many barriers to these behaviors regardless of what size you are. Like maybe we
Mhm.
should be more focused on those instead of like maybe we should work less, and maybe that could probably help in the long
Yeah.
run.
Yes. Well, and I think too, you mentioning the role capitalism plays in all of this, and then even as we got back to or talking about just the mindset behind white supremacy, um,
Mhm.
can you discuss a little bit the role of like the intersection between like race, body health, and mental health? Because I think
Mhm.
sometimes it's easy for people to be like, well, everybody has fat people, so I don't see how race plays a part into it. It's just your
Yes.
size, but it does play a role into it.
It does, absolutely. So whenever I'm talking about larger body experiences, it's really important to conceptualize how many marginalized identities someone is also holding, and race being one of the heavy ones, I guess, for say, one of the most impactful ones, especially in America, because America is really anti-Black. So if you hold that identity, and you don't need me to say this to you, it is really challenging, and and then you add that to also being in a larger body, and it's extremely traumatic, both of those experiences. So it is really important because depending on where you're at, how you're being perceived, how you're being treated by your social space, like that's your trauma. we are herd animals. We're very we need each other, we need community, we need space like that. If we don't feel that, we feel like we're going, it threatens our sense of safety, our sense of living, because we wouldn't be able to live by ourselves in like a old school gatherer culture. So
Even
it's
as
actually
introverts?
even the introverts, we are wired to need at least some form of community, which is why we feel shame when we do something like socially off. But also introverts probably were more respected in village type spaces to begin with. Like it's probably not the way we see it now. We elevate extroverts as being better, so that's probably looks different, I would imagine, in that situation. But if we don't feel like we fit somewhere, we get feelings of panic and disconnection, because it's a similar physiological response to a survival concern, right? So that's happening double, like that's happening race and body size. And then if you have another mental health issue on top of that, which, the egg, who knows what's causing what? Is it society? Is it like, that's I don't think it's something we're ever going to really figure out, because society's already done its work.
Well, that's one that I constantly am like, I mean, I know my depression is like it's my brain and it's the chemicals and it's all of those, because I've been diagnosed with actual depression. But there's also those depressive moods, right? And that kind of everyone sort of goes through sometimes. And sometimes I'm like, am I fat because I'm depressed, or am I depressed because I'm fat? Because there is a level of like, the more like my depression would lead me to have periods of times where like I just didn't want to leave, I just wanted to stay home, and then you're moving less, you're going out more, which then you're gaining weight, which then makes you not want to go out even more. And it's like this vicious cycle that you really have to push yourself, like you really have to push yourself through and be like, well, I'm going to go out even if I don't feel comfortable, or even if I feel judged, because just forcing myself to have that movement is what's going to make me feel better in the long run, and is what's going to encourage healthy habits. But it's really hard sometimes, like wrapping your head around that. And I feel like people don't always understand and give it the amount of grace that, like, listen, you don't know what I had to do mentally just to, I mean, forget physically, that's already a problem because I have stuff, but like mentally just to show up.
Yes, I think individuals who are either in denial of their own mental health stuff, or who have never experienced their own mental health diagnostic, I guess you say, I don't think they have any awareness of how hard it is if you have depression to show up, or how hard it is if you are neurodivergent and your brain works a different way than the people around you. These are all barriers to being able to reach goals or joy or contentment, whatever you perceive as success. Like, so we're not considering that when we think about like white supremacy. We're only thinking about the top, and everyone below is a waste of time, and we don't want to have to deal with them, because the goal is to be on top. If you're on top, you're valuable. And we have the tendency to kick down people below us, because again, it's the idea is you have to be on top.
Yeah. And I've realized that more and more, like we have such a competitive mindset, like people in general. And I think because like I've worked to unpack that myself, I notice it so much more in everyone. Like even just talking about someone's music, right? It's rarely like, oh, I love this. It's like that music is crap. And it's like, why can't it just be you don't like that and you like this? Like people always are doing this like competitive thing with everything, and it's like they have to show that they are right and they are on top, and instead of just saying like there's two separate things and there's two different opinions. I feel like once you adopt that mindset, it makes like I feel better thinking that way, because I don't feel like just because I like something and someone else doesn't, that they're right and I'm wrong. And I feel like if you constantly are feeling the need to show that you're better or that you're right, it also makes you feel down when you feel like you're in a position where you're down, like where they're above you. Absolutely. Versus thinking we're just different.
And we've all been taught to aggressively compete against each other. And and I still feel it come up in my body when like I'll see another like fat content creator and I'm like, that's amazing. But the first thing that's there is competition, because that is what we have been trained to do. And then just sit there go like, wait, no, that's manufactured scarcity. Like that's not true at all. We don't need to compete with each other. Like we all can exist and we all can support each other and support we don't need to claw each other down. We benefit from community. We need community. how do we create that without the harm that we're causing?
And what are some ways to sort of unpack? Like I know how I did it with myself, which is just calling myself out when I see it or when I think it. Like something I learned from
Mm,
my therapist is, stopping the thought and questioning if it's
mm.
true. You could probably give a more detailed description on how to do that, but like how can people sort of question that mindset, whether it's how they see the competition and anything in general, or just how they feel about their body and body positivity to
Yeah.
bring that to change that mindset for themselves.
Yeah, let's start with body. Do not make comments about other people's bodies anymore. Like, and if someone else is doing that around you, kind of challenge it. Like, that's weird. Like, why are we doing that? Like, that person's outfit is fine. Why are you taking it down? Like, you know, we want to shift how we look at other people, because that's going to shift how we look at ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
because like what we give to others is what is coming back around. And even if you're not an outwardly judgmental person, we all have it. We all have these belief systems that we have to deconstruct. We have to unpack them. We have to own them and say, like, this is something I've been taught and I don't want it anymore. How do I engage with people without competing? How do I be okay with not winning? How do I be okay with not being in the center of
Mm-hmm.
something, which I feel like is more of a white people issue? Like, how do I pull myself back and be okay with that? And that I'm still valuable. I'm still a good human, even if I'm not like the star of the show. And that, I think,
Mm-hmm.
is a lot when you've been taught your entire life that you're only valuable if you are the star of the show. Like, that can feel like scary at first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I had a very so one of my most unpopular opinions that I stand by is that participation trophies are a good thing. A lot of people hate them. A lot of people hate them, but I'm like, but they show that you were part of a team. They show that you gave an effort. Like if you only like, I'm not saying don't give a trophy to the winner, to the best person, to the whatever MVP. Yes, award them, but also award people and let people know from a young age that just showing up is worth it, because
Yep.
there's a lot of people who don't show up, who don't come, who
Yeah.
don't participate. And if you get nothing for it, then, like, what does that create in your mind? So I'm a huge fan of
Yeah.
participation trophies. And I feel like if more people, because at the end of the day, like the top is like, it is kind of like this, right? Like there's only
Mhm.
so many people that can be at the top of anything, but everyone along the triangle matters, no matter where
Yes.
you are.
Yes.
And you have to
I like
like
that.
get yourself out of the mindset that you only
Mhm.
matter if you're at the top. And if you can get comfortable mattering anywhere in there, then your life overall feels a
Yeah,
little
because, like, I
better.
mean, let's be honest. None of us are going to be at the top. Like, the top, if you're like really thinking about, like, from the white supremacy lens, from like the social capitalistic lens, people at the top are like probably super ethical and bad. Like,
They
so
usually are.
those are the
Right.
people at the top. None of
Right.
us are really going to ever, like, what was I reading? Like, you're 2 bad months away. You're closer, or like you're 2 bad months away from being homeless than you're 2 good months away from being a billionaire.
Mm.
Like, we are not that close to the top, no matter how great you are at your job.
Right.
So, and eventually there's going to be someone who does something a little bit better than you, or a little bit different. If you're even competing in that way, it doesn't matter. But there's that's always going to happen. So if we work on our sense of self and we realize that we all matter, we all bring something to the table, and that is the important part, not that
Mhm.
you've knocked everyone else out to get to the top.
Right.
uh, and value is wherever you're at in that pyramid. Value is more about the connections that you're making, kind of like what you're saying with the participation trophies. Like, value is your effort and the connections that you're making that are fulfilling, more than your ability to produce in a certain area.
Hmm. Yeah, and back to the whole white supremacist capitalist thing, we are so ingrained that we only matter when we produce, and like, and
Mhm.
you matter because you matter because you're a person. And one of
Yeah.
my favorite things, and why I'm always encouraging of therapy when people have the ability to get it, is that you get the tools to kind of work through things. I think sometimes people don't realize how much control you have over your brain and your thought, right? Like
Yeah.
I think they don't
Mhm.
necessarily realize how much of it is packed on both by how you're raised and just implicit biases, and like we were talking about
Mhm.
media and all of that stuff. Even if you don't realize it, it's getting in there, but you can
Yeah.
control your thoughts.
Mhm.
And like you said, even if you have those moments at first where you're like, if you do the work, those moments are literally seconds, and then you move on to
Yeah.
the healthy coping mechanisms you have created for yourself. And so I always want to encourage people to like know that you have control of certain things. Like I one day decided I was so passive aggressive, and I worked to get past it. I'm not saying I don't still have moments. I'm not saying it doesn't still trigger me, but for the most part, I don't engage in versus like I could just be like, well, that's just who I am and go with it.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's just who I am. That's one of the hardest things I think to hear as a therapist because that's not really true. Like, that's kind of we're a culmination of our parents' issues and family issues and societal issues and TV issues. And when we get to a point where we want to start reflecting on that, like building your sense of insight, realizing how you impact others, how others impact you, how you want to show up in the world, like the values that are important to you, those are all building insight and challenging the things that you were taught before, because there's a lot of junk that we have to get rid of because all of the stuff that we've learned from television is garbage. So we have to get rid of all those value sets. I love me some TV, so don't.
Oh yeah,
but you have
research.
Yeah, it's good research. But you have to realize that that was happening from 0 to probably, I mean, 20, 25, when people start challenging things a bit more, maybe even younger if you're in it. That you've had all those years of this really intense education that you were pretty enthralled in because it's television, and you have to reflect on what those thoughts are and decide if you want to keep them or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I can't tell you thank you enough for, I mean, we could keep chatting forever because it's such a wide topic and a nuanced topic, and there's really so much involved to unpack and everything. But I think this was great. Thank you so much for joining me to chat and answer my questions. If someone wants to get a hold of you to see more, learn more, how can they find you?
Right now, I'm the most at Fat Positive Therapist on Instagram. And I had so much fun here. And you're right, it's such a broad topic with so many like intersectionalities and different like subcomponents. So I'm really happy that you are holding space to talk about that stuff.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate all of you who joined me. And I hope you all have a great evening. Thank you again so much, Kayla, for joining me.
Thank you.